You are listening to SPN, the Sports Podcasting Network.
Kelvin och Axel Schwarzenegger!
Va a pegarle el Ronaldinho Gaucho. Ya lo hace. Pierna derecha, directo al arco. ¡Golazo! 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 ¡Golazo!
This is Soccer Today, live on SPN Radio, your new live show about the beautiful game in all its glory, with Duane, Rollins and Kevin Laramee. MLS, EPL, La Liga, Champions League, all is fair game. Powered by the Sports Podcasting Network. Visit us at sportspodcastingnetwork.com.
Day two of preview week here on Soccer Today, the Sports Podcasting Network. I'm Duane Rollins in Toronto. Joining me, as always, is Kevin Laramee in Montreal. And on the line is Paul Tenorio, 442. How you doing, Paul?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on, guys.
Paul is going to be our Eastern Conference expert here. He had a great article up previewing the whole league recently. I encourage you to go read that. But listen to us first. Listen to Paul sort of expand upon some of his thoughts. Let's just jump right in. And we'll sort of, when I do these preview articles, I kind of just like to go bottom to top. But we do have an expansion team in the mix this year. So let's start there, Paul. What are your thoughts on Atlanta's first season? They've obviously come in with a big splash, but is it just that? Is it a splash that will be followed by maybe a thud when they hit the bottom of the pool in this season, or are they for real?
Well, I don't know. I think we'll see. I mean, I really personally like the way that this roster was put together. I mean, a lot of people want to say that, they were very, very dependent on international players, and certainly that's true, right? We've seen them sign a ton of internationals to this roster, especially when you look at the higher profile guys, Miguel Almiron, Tito Villalba, Joseph Martinez, the three DPs. But I think when you look deeper into this roster, they build some protection so that it's not just a team dependent on international players. I mean, they've got guys with over 92,000 career minutes in Major League Soccer in total. Michael Parkhurst, Zach Lloyd, Jacob Peterson, Jeff Laurentowicz, Tyrone Mears. So this is a team that's got enough MLS experience to get by as well. And then they've got some exciting young pieces. So, when I look at this team, certainly I think that they're capable of challenging. I have them as a playoff team in their first year, becoming the first team since Seattle to do it. And in part, it's because of that balance where you've got MLS guys who can step into starting jobs if needed, if guys that have come from outside of the league need a little bit of time to adjust.
Fair enough, and that is the consensus that I am kind of getting around the league. I'm not as convinced yet, but we'll see, as you say. Another team that you're very familiar with that was an expansion team not very long ago that you did cover as a beat for some time is, of course, Orlando. Orlando is kind of going through a transition. It's a little difficult to understand exactly what they're doing right now as Jason Christ tries to put his stamp on it. Do you see a slip back for them, or are we underestimating what they're capable of this year?
No, I do. I do see a slip back for them. I just don't know that they're a better team than they were last year. I like the Giles Barnes trade, actually. I mean, obviously they're going to a 4-4-2 diamond, and I think that partnership with Laren could potentially be fruitful. But I look at the back line, and I think there are tons of questions, and they're really going to struggle early on. My biggest concern for them was depth on that back end, and we're going to see that on display right away. They have three fullbacks, I believe, that are injured. So right away, they're going to be tested. Tommy Redding, the center back, is away with the U.S. under-20. So there are some questions for me there. Even when they're healthy, I'm not sure that PC, the left back coming from the NASL, is MLS quality, especially when you're talking about playing behind a diamond where the left side of the diamond is Matias Perez Garcia. I don't see how you defend with a midfield diamond of Notarino, MPG, Will Johnson, and Kaká. Will Johnson can cover a lot of ground, but how much are you going to ask of him? So I have my doubts about Orlando City, and I honestly think unless Kaká and Kyle Laren put together massive seasons, it could be a tough year for Orlando City.
We're talking about difficult off-season. One that was movemented as well was the one in New York, Paul, in the Red Bull side of New York, so basically in New Jersey. It was a off-season with the last few weeks with the Ali Curtis and Dax McCarty. Dax McCarty to trade, and they let go of Ali Curtis. Diehard cult figures for the supporters are gone now. How do you see New York approaching this season? Is it Jesse Marsh in his head thinking that the project is bigger than the sum of its parts and are actually trying to get more playing time for the youngins, or a change of direction mentality? Where do you see those moves in the big picture for the Red Bulls?
Yeah, I mean, I think Jesse Marsh has been clear that he felt that there were some young players that were ready to play. But I really do think that there are some cultural problems there. When you see a power struggle like that within an organization, when you undervalue the importance of a person's personality within the locker room, I think that can lead to problems. And I think, I have New York Red Bulls finishing third in the East. That may be too high. I think that's a product more of my lack of faith in any of the rest of the group to break into that top three more than it is about the Red Bulls. I could see them slipping to a 4 or 5 seed. I still think it's a playoff seed, but some of the problems there remain. They depend on Bradley Wright Phillips to be the only goal scorer that they have. If he's not producing, they struggle. Dax McCarty played a much bigger role than people realize in facilitating a lot for Sasha Kljestan. How is he going to adjust with Sean Davis behind him versus Dax McCarty? There are so many different elements here, and we saw them now. They're playing a 4-2-2-2 stacked central midfield. And that's going to ask a lot of many different people, and especially for me, Gonzalo Verón, who just hasn't shown enough in his time in Major League Soccer, and now they're going to need him to really produce. So, I'm still waiting to see a little bit more from them, but I don't think it's going to be a type of season for them where they go on a supporter shield type of run.
We've talked about some teams that didn't have the best off season. One of my highlight of the offseason, in the preseason especially so far, Paul, is that goal. That goal that Chicago scored with about 1 million passes and a great finish. That goal by Chicago, is it the beginning of a new era for the Chicago Fire?
They're going to be a better team. Let's start there for sure. They have upgraded their central midfield extremely well with Dax McCarty and Juninho in the middle of the park. If Nemanja Nikolic can score at the rate where he scored over the last 7 years, then they're going to have a premier goal scorer in this league. And I really like Michael Jalou. I think he's very, very underrated by the rest of the league. And obviously David Accam is there. So I think they're going to be better. I think they're going to be on the fringe of an Eastern Conference that I think will be extremely difficult to separate between spots 4 through 9 or 10 in this conference. It's going to be very, very competitive. That being said, there are some things that concern me about the Fire team. I think right back is still a major issue for them that they have to solve. I'd like to see them add another center back. And my jury's still out on the new goalkeeper they signed, Jorge Bava. So we'll see if he's an MLS quality goalkeeper. So the back end for the Fire is still concerning. But certainly when you upgrade the core the way they have, and again, I still like Johan Kapelov. I think Brandon Vincent's got some ability at left back. They're going to be a better team. It's just a matter of whether they can sustain in the second year of this rebuild the way Philadelphia did last year and hang on for that 60 to make the playoff, or whether they're going to need some reinforcements in the summer window to do that.
But Paul, I listened to the Extra Time Radio preview yesterday. For those that are interested in that, they put the Eastern Conference preview out yesterday, and one team that they're really high on that I was a little hesitant to buy into as much as they were. But certainly they were looking at the Columbus Crew to take a jump back. And if you read between the lines, they were kind of picking them to finish second. Is that too high in your estimation, or are the Crew really ready for a bounce back season?
No, look, I think last year was a bit of an anomaly for Columbus. I have them finishing 4th in the conference this year. So I agree that they can make a leap. There's still some issues there that concern me. Certainly part of it is going to be whether Ola Kamara can produce over the course of a whole year. And then we still have questions defensively. That was the big issue for them last year. Is Zach Steffen going to be good enough in goal over the course of 34 games? Is Jonathan Mensah going to be a DP level center back the way he's paid to be? There are still questions there. But I do look at this team, and I still like the pieces that are there. I like Higuain. I think Finley had a down year last year and can improve. I think Will Trapp had a down year last year and can improve. And I thought Justin Merrim was fantastic. If he can produce the way he did last year, with Higuain next to him now, I think they'll be a better team. So, I look at Columbus as having a pretty good season. Second place in the East is a bit higher than I see them, but I certainly think they're going to be a contender again in the conference.
You mentioned them a second ago. The Philly Union did have maybe the most surprising season last year in terms of them getting back into a playoff position after several years out. Only lasted the one game in there. Now, are they going to build upon that, or are they due perhaps in your mind for a step back?
Yeah, I don't have any faith right now in what I've seen from Philly. They had two major issues with the team last season, and I really think they failed to address both of them. The first was they were highly, highly dependent on CJ Sapong to score goals. When he was hot, they were very good early in the year. When he was not, they really dropped off, and they were fortunate to make the playoffs. They resolved that by what? Adding Jay Simpson, a League One goal forward from England. I'm going to have to see him play to believe in him to be the answer. And then their other major issue was center back. And you go get a guy in Oguchi Onyewu who hasn't played a competitive game in 18 months plus. Again, I don't think that's the answer. So, is their midfield going to be a bit better with Meduzanin that they added? Yes, they will, but that wasn't for me the big problem areas for this team. And I look at them as having the same issues as last year in a conference that's gotten stronger top to bottom. So I have Philadelphia slipping this season.
Now, teams in another direction. We'll start with this one because it's topical today. If you listen to Jason Davis's show this morning, he had John Strong from Fox on, and Rob Stone, apologies. And he was talking about the Revolution and how the Revolution, especially the owners, the Kraft family, how there's been disrespect in the actual club for a few years now. Paul, I know you follow New England quite closely. What do you think about the Revs' upcoming season and more maybe their last 5 season as a whole? Do they get the opportunities that they deserve as an MLS club in 2017?
Well, I think, when you look again, this is a New England team where their big problems last year was defensively. They have a ton of talent in the attacking third. That's never been a problem. They added Kai Kamara last year in a trade with Columbus. But the attacking end wasn't the problem. It was defending. Now, I will say, unlike Philadelphia, New England went out. They went and spent targeted allocation money on 2 center backs to try to fix those issues on the back line. If those 2 center backs end up being high-level MLS quality defenders, I think New England could be a very good team. If they're not, I think we're going to see some issues with the depth on the back end for New England. So, for me, they're a team that kind of teeters on finishing somewhere in the 9, 10, 11 range, but they could also be a team that finishes 4, 5, 6, just kind of depending on how these newer players adapt. Now, when you talk about New England as a franchise, as a club, on the bigger picture, the way Rob Stone did today, I think it's difficult to argue some of the points that he made, namely the fact that this is a family that has a lot of money, the Kraft family and ownership. They committed a ton of that money to keeping Major League Soccer alive in the early years. They were one of the ownership groups that was committed, that literally held this league together. And I think a lot of those ownership groups kind of wanted to wait and make that money back. And, you're looking now, though, at a league in an era when there are ownership groups coming in really ready to spend and commit real money, not just to their first teams, but to the training facilities, to the stadiums, to the infrastructure. And the Kraft family hasn't done that. This team still plays out at Foxborough Stadium. They play on the worst turf field, in my opinion, in the league. They haven't spent money on the first team. So you see them falling behind in a lot of different ways. And I think the frustrating part of it is the fact that the Kraft family is wealthy enough to spend on a level more similar to Arthur Blank. And so at some point, Robert Kraft and his family, Jonathan Kraft, who heads a lot of the Revolution Soccer, is going to have to make a decision at the end of the day. And that decision is whether they're willing to commit to spending on the levels that we've seen in the league, or whether they're not willing to commit that money. And ultimately, I understand what Rob Stone is saying, but I would also throw out there that I think New England is a team that in the early days of MLS, that ownership group was one of the few that was very committed to this league. And the problem is it's a different league now, and the money that we're going to start to see spent not just this year, but in the next 5 years, the next 10 years, is going to go even to another level. And so ultimately, I think there are going to be a few ownership groups, not just the Crafts, that are going to have to make a decision about their commitment to the league and to the teams they own.
The Super Frank experiment is over in New York City. Frankie Lampard has retired, but Pirlo apparently is still playing, and that will be one of the talking points this year. Paul, when it concerns to NYCFC, is this year for Pirlo the one too many?
I don't know. I think, look, I have to appreciate what NYCFC did. They went and got a midfielder that can play behind him and do a lot more work so that Pirlo can have a little bit more free reign to float around. They got a player that can play in front of Pirlo and be another facilitator. It probably is something where they're kind of pulling back on the demands for Pirlo. And, look, this is a guy who doesn't cover a lot of ground to begin with, so I don't think fitness is as much of an issue. And now you've got to put somebody next to him that covers a lot more of that defensive responsibility. I think Patrick Vieira was well aware of that, and he wanted to make sure that he had that coverage in his midfield. So, look, I really like this NYCFC team. I think they added to the strength that they had already. They addressed some of the weaknesses that were there. Rodney Wallace, I think, will be a great fit on the left side. Again, you've got to like the midfield pieces they added in the middle of the park as well. So, for me, New York is a team that I thought was an overachiever last year and was surprising in how quickly they were able to get to that position. This year, with what they've developed and the answers that they've made with some of the moves in the offseason, I like this team a bit more. There's still a couple questions from the back line, but as Patrick Vieira showed last year, he's not worried as much about defense. I think it's going to be similar to Atlanta. Play a high line, attack, and win some games 4-2, 4-3, even if it means every once in a while you get 6 put away or 7 put away in the back of your own net.
As a Torontonian, it frightens me to say this, but on paper, TFC does kind of look like the Eastern regular season favorite. The main concern up here is, can they avoid the hangover effect from Major League Soccer's Cup final loss that they had there, the way that they lost it, etc. Am I wrong to see them as the favorite in the East?
I think Toronto's clearly the favorite in the East. For me, for my money, they were the best team in the East last year. They brought all the main pieces back in the core of that team. These are young players who are in their prime, many of them. Obviously, Jovinko being the biggest one. Josie Altidore is in his prime. Michael Bradley has really, really grown into that number 6 role. So, I look at this TFC team, and I not only do I like their starting 11, I think they have some really strong pieces that can come off the bench and contribute. So, for me, it's a clear favorite for Toronto. I think that they are contender for the Supporter Shield. I really look at them as kind of the top class in the East, and everyone else is trying to play catch up. And I would be surprised if another team finished ahead of Toronto this year in the East.
Duane, the Torontonian, I'm a Montrealer. And when you're looking at the Montreal Impact's offseason, you did have consistency with a few key pieces added, Chris Duval and Adrian Aregi recently, and waiting on the arrival of Blurrin Zemeli this summer. What is your take on the 2017 edition of the Montreal Impact, Paul?
Yeah, I think I upset some Montreal fans with my predictions. I had them out of the playoffs. And I think you have to remember this is a Montreal team that had a dip at the end of last season. I think they were another team like Philadelphia that was fortunate to sneak into the playoffs. And then obviously they went on a fantastic run in the playoffs. That counterattacking system worked so well. The older veterans in central midfield, I think, played up and above the way they had played in the regular season, and it almost paid off with the trip to MLS Cup. My concern is I don't think they did enough in the offseason. Adegi, I think, was a very important addition. They needed to get younger in midfield. If he is able to be that energy in the midfield, I think that they'll have a bit more of a rotation there. But for me, this is a team that's another year older. This is a team where it's going to be questionable, in my opinion, and how well they defend. I think for one, if you play in the low block over the course of a postseason with the counterattacking soccer, I think that is something that can be very effective because you get into series where teams are forced to look for goals. But over the course of a 34-game season, you're going to see teams that have a better understanding for how to play against that counterattack, that aren't opening themselves up to the counter as often. For me, the only difference when you talk about Montreal, the X factor, of course, is Ignacio Piatti. To me, he's the best player in the league, not named Sebastian Jovinko, and he is a player capable of putting a team on his back and carrying them to the playoffs. I like that attacking three. I think Mancosu has a chance to score a lot of goals. Obviously, you don't want to leave Aduro one-on-one on the right. It's why they are so effective in that counter. They cause a lot of those problems, but this is a team that I think the rest of the league kind of understands how to play against them during the season. And for me, I just don't know that they have enough in the middle of the park against a lot of teams that I think have gotten stronger in that spot in the East. So I see Montreal sliding. But as I wrote in my column, I was forced, of course, to predict 1 through 11. It's very, very difficult, I would say impossible to do so in Major League Soccer because this is a league that is impacted so much by injuries, so much by the summer window, so much by international call-ups. For me, the spots 4 through 9 and 10, really that big of a group of teams that I don't know that you can easily differentiate and say, these 3 are playoff teams and these 4 aren't. I think that we're going to see an East that in those spots 4 through 9 and 10, we're going to see a very, very competitive race that I think goes down to the last 2 or 3 weeks of the season. That those 3 playoff teams won't be determined until that point. And I think Montreal is very much in the thick of that group, along with the likes of Chicago, Atlanta, DC United, and New England as well. So this is going to be a very, very tight race in the East. And Montreal right now, if I had to guess, I have outside of the playoffs. But as you alluded to, they have an addition coming in the summer window. Maybe it changes the team a bit more, makes that midfield even younger. And that's what gives them the push to get into the playoffs above that group. So we'll see.
There's one thing that's consistent about Major League Soccer is it's very difficult to peg these teams, to predict them in the preseason. It's kind of a fool's errand sometimes. Let's move a little bit beyond for a couple quick questions to wrap it up. You don't have to just speak at the East. And in fact, I do want to ask you about one West team, a team that's fascinating me a little bit, the expansion side, Minnesota. Now that we've seen a little bit more of their roster since the last time we spoke, I'm just wondering where you think they are in terms of their build and whether or not they have an opportunity to be competitive this year.
Well, look, there's 2 things about Minnesota I like. I really like their first 11. I think they've done a pretty decent job of building that first team. We've seen some guys that have come from Scandinavia, especially, that have had long professional careers that are in that, 28, 29, 30 range that have a ton of experience. That's a good thing. I really like Johan Venegas. I think he was underutilized in Montreal. I think he will have a breakout season with Minnesota. Kevin Molino, I'm a big fan of Kevin Molino. I think he, again, is a guy who's underrated because everyone looked at Kaká in Orlando. A lot of teams I talked to actually were scouting against Kevin Molino more than they were scouting against Kaká. He's just not as active as people give him credit for. Obviously, he's a huge name. So, you look at pieces like that, I think it's going to be, there are going to be some positive things there for Minnesota. But in this league, in MLS, you've heard me bring up this word now a lot when I'm talking about the East. Depth is huge. It's a 34-game season. There will be injuries. There will be things that you don't anticipate happening. And I don't think Montreal has the depth. They've taken some risks. They've added some guys that have had longer injury histories in their careers. That's part of the reason why they were on affordable numbers to come to Minnesota. If those guys can't stay healthy, I think Minnesota really starts to fall into some problems here. For me, there was a little bit too much leaning on the NASL roster. I think they ended up with 7 or 8 guys from that NASL team on the MLS team. And again, this is an NASL team that didn't qualify for the playoffs last year. So that to me is ultimately what will cost Minnesota. I don't have them as being the worst team in the history of MLS. I think that is a little bit of an exaggeration. I think that Adrian Heath will have them competitive, but I think ultimately without the depth that they have, if you look beyond the first 11 or 12 players on the team, that's where the issues are going to crop up. So I have them towards the bottom of the West. Whether they finish 9th, 10th, or 11th, I don't think it matters as much. But I think they built a solid core in the first year where you're going to see some pieces carry over into year 2, but there's just a lot of work left to do to fill out that bench with guys I think can really help you in this league.
Every year, Paul, especially in the Eastern Conference, but in the Western Conference too, every year we have a surprise team that after a few months, they're still among the top 3, top 4 of the conference, and they're surprising by their results. Last year we had Philadelphia. Who in 2017 would fit that profile?
That's a good question. I think for me, I'll give you a couple teams in the East and a team in the West. I think for me in the East, I have both Columbus and Chicago as being teams that are going to be much improved from last season. In the West, I think Sporting Kansas City is going to be a lot better than people think. I think this is a team that is going to be up there challenging FC Dallas and Seattle for one of the top 2 spots in the Western Conference. I really like what Peter Vermees has done, the players he's added, the way that they address the issues they have. They needed to get better on the wing. They did that on both sides of the wing. I think Dom Dwyer is going to benefit hugely. I think they're going to be a little bit better on the back line. Graham Zusi is going to need to adjust at right back, but I think he's going to be a more than serviceable right back in this league. If Ike Opara stays healthy, I like the Beasler-Opara pairing as well. So for me, I think Sporting Kansas City is going to be the big surprise team that kind of pulls the NYCFC of last year and surprises everyone by finishing second in the West.
All right, Paul, I hate to do it, but it is a prediction week and a prediction show. So I'm going to need to hear your MLS Cup final prediction in February, which is as silly as anything you can possibly do. But nonetheless, I'm going to ask you for it, and your MVP for this year, and who wins the MLS Cup, obviously.
Oh, wow. Yeah, this is a tough one, but I'm going to go with Toronto coming out of the East. I'm pretty much going chalk here. What people would say is chalk. I think this is the year FC Dallas gets the MLS Cup. I think Mara Diaz coming midway through the year is going to put them over the top. So I have FC Dallas, Toronto, and I actually think Toronto is going to win it this year. So I'll give the nod to Toronto in MLS Cup, and I think Jovinko has a point to prove last year after not even making it as a finalist at MVP voting. I think he's going to absolutely tear up the league, and he's going to be the only person not named Preki to win multiple MLS MVP awards. He'll join Preki as just the second person to do so. So that is pretty chalk for me, but that part of the prediction field is where I feel most comfortable, most confident.
All right, fair enough, Paul. Anything beyond your preview article that we mentioned earlier that you want to promote before we say goodbye?
No, I mean, I would love for everyone just to continue to check out 442USA. We're obviously on Twitter at 442USA, and you can find me at Paul Tenorio. I mean, we're hammering MLS content every single day. There's a new story, at least one new story up on our website. So, come check it out and let me know on Twitter what kind of stories you're looking for out there. Every Monday I have a column. I'm always looking for fresh ideas.
All right, Paul, thanks again, and we'll talk soon.
Thanks so much for having me.
You are listening to Soccer Today, live on SPN Radio. Visit sportspodcastingnetwork.com for more.
And welcome back. Kevin, we're not going to be very long in this segment. We're going to keep it to a half hour tonight. A lot of content that we're getting through, and Kevin has some place that he needs to get to, and we all need to keep Kevin's.
And we need to get ready for tomorrow morning show, Duane. We have a show back tomorrow morning at 10 a.m. And we're saying it's preview week. Had a lot of previewing to do.
Yes, exactly. Rudy Schuler will join us tomorrow to do a special preview that's hyper-focused on the Canadian team. So there's that. There's also some women's stuff that's coming down the pipe this week. We'll try to get to that maybe in the Thursday show a little bit if we can, but we're doing a lot of focus on Major League Soccer, obviously, in the lead up to the weekend, the lead up to Friday night. I'm about to log off and sign up for our 2017 version of MLS Live. So that's exciting. That's my plans for tonight, Kevin. But to
give us a hand, you can go to patreon.com/sports podcasting network. That's patreon.com/sports podcasting network. $1 helps a lot. $1 goes a long way. Helps with production. Helps with the show. You hear the show in good quality, good production values. There's a cost with those production values. And with your help, we can even do more. But Duane, before we say goodbye, I have an announcement to make. It's been brewing for a while, and you don't even know about this. If you remember last year, I did a little something called the MLS Postgame Show. Well, it's back better than ever. Every Sunday night, 1 a.m., I will be recording. It will be live, too, if you are a night owl on the East Coast. But I will be doing my famous MLS Postgame Show the entire season, every single week, on Sunday nights. A recap of games, scores, box scores, topics, interviews, audio, all that you're accustomed to from all the shows we do, but focus on MLS every Sunday night, ready for you and your commute on Monday morning.
Sounds good. I look forward to listening to that. Maybe once in a while I can join you, but that's pretty late for me. I'm too old for that. But nonetheless, Kevin,
I was trying to find a time that I can consistently do this show and not have any other things. What else could I do on a Sunday at 1 a.m.? Exactly. Sleep. What's that?
There's nothing good that will happen at 1 a.m. on a Sunday. If you are still out and about at 1 a.m. on a Sunday, go home. All right, Kevin, on that note, I'm going to say goodbye. I'll let you, as always, say goodbye to the listeners, and we'll join us tomorrow when Rudy Schuler will join us to preview the Canadian teams. But until then, as always, Kevin, say goodbye.
Wednesday, 10 a.m. on sportspodcastnetwork.com/soccer today. You can listen to the Canadian team season preview for the 2017 season in Major League Soccer. That kicks off, yes, Friday already. Shortest offseason in Canadian soccer history, you could put it that way. And until tomorrow, I'm Kevin Laramee, and have a great soccer. You were listening to SPN, the Sports Podcasting Network. Visit us, sportspodcastingnetwork.com.